Hello, and welcome to The Void, where I speak and likely nobody listens. I hope you're having a good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, a good night. Let's jump straight into it. So, this week, I wanted to talk about friendships and how, in my opinion, they will and should always trump whatever romantic relationship that you are in. And we'll sort of dive in and go right from when we begin socializing, etc., etc., and sort of explain why maybe your friendships might drop off by comparison to your romantic relationships, and build right up into why I think it is important, more important than being in a romantic relationship, to look after your friendships, look after the relationships that look after you when things might go wrong. So to begin with, let's talk about socialization and how it all kind of works and how it's set up to work. So, kind of from the moment that we're born, we're learning, we're taking stuff in, and as a species, we learn what we see. There's like kind of some stuff that is built in biologically, but at least because of how long of an incubation period we have and how long we spend with our parents post being born. And I mean that in like a biological sense and like an evolutionary sense, in that like a lot of animals will only stay with their parents for a matter of weeks, whereas like for humans it's years. You're looked after by your parents for years. So we're learning constantly, and we're seeing and we're hearing language, and we're taking that in, and we're watching behavior, and we're taking that in. And like the first, I'd say like 3 years, this is obviously not scientifically based, but like the first 3 years of your life, you're just watching and taking stuff in. And then you get to a point where you can like verbally communicate. And kind of from that point on, you're learning for yourself, testing stuff out. You're obviously still seeing and doing, but for the most part, you're going away and you're testing the waters a little bit. Like you're going to wherever you go, school, work, not work because you're a kid, but like, school, hobbies and stuff like that, clubs. And you're testing out how far you can push things. You're pushing limits to see how far you can push the envelope before there's a negative repercussion and something that you don't like happens. So let's take it to like school, for example. You'll be playing in a playground, and like you'll be, I don't know, playing like James Bond. I used to play James Bond. Used to love it. And you'll be like doing like a fight sequence. Pew, 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 pew. And all of a sudden someone will get a bit closer and you go, pew, pew, push them down. They'll start crying. Oh no, you pushed it a little bit too far. You rein it back in. You don't do that next time because you hurt someone. And mostly when you're that age, you're fearing repercussions from like adults. But you learn and you take it in and you adjust for next time. And I think the important thing here is that like there are these milestones that we hit throughout growing up that are important, and we keep striving for the next one. And that's an important point that will sort of crop up later. But like I sort of want to follow the trajectory of all these points. So like you get to like school, and you're meeting your first friends, and you're sort of figuring out your own personality almost, and where you sit in and amongst your peers. You sort of get good at figuring out what that looks like, where you fit socially. And that's a lifelong thing that you get good at gauging whether or not you fit in a social circle. And that's kind of point one, is like finding your place in the community, because as humans, we're communal animals. I think I'd read somewhere once that we function best in groups of around 100. Anything above that is too much for us really to deal with socially, in terms of like relationships and having like, you know, personable relationships. And there was like, I remember reading that there was like limits on like how many people you could be close to. Doesn't like me today, does it? The autofocus. Of like, yeah, people who you were close to versus like people who you were like acquainted with, and people that you sort of knew from a distance, but sort of knew they existed. And that's kind of how we function communally, biologically. So we're figuring out the place in that, and once you've sort of figured that out, the next thing is sort of like getting a group of friends together and figuring out what friends do together. And obviously you learn that a lot from like maybe even like parents or siblings and stuff, of like what sort of things they do, and things that you would like to do. But like this, like, you know, base group of friends, they'll sort of form a bit of like a molding clay around you of like, you know, what you like, your tastes, and like, you know, through like primary school, you'll sort of grow with like people, and like maybe you'll leave people behind, something will happen, you'll get a new group, and it's this experimental phase where the goal is to make friends, to figure out socially where you sit. And like I'd say by the time you're like 10, people like tend to have like a core group of feelings and like personality traits that they take into their lives with them. And that's kind of like the first, what I'll call like milestone, is like making friends and finding your community and where you sit like in the world, really, because socially that's kind of what's important for the rest of your life. Is like where you sit, and navigating that is going to be invaluable information for yourself moving forward with your entire life. You know, in job interviews and everything that you do in daily life, you'll be taking into account the things that you know about yourself and moving into that. And like, you know, this, you're making friends and you're building friends, and these people are helping you through it. And I think it's a balance of like stakes, of like, how much can I rely on these people? How valuable are they to me? And what are the stakes if I lose that? How much of myself am I giving to this relationship versus how much am I getting back? And what is the, you know, return on investment almost? And that's kind of a constant evaluation that you'll be making, and that's going to fluctuate more and more as the stakes get higher and higher within each relationship. So moving forward from that, we sort of enter into our first experiences of romance, and this happens at varied points for everybody. But I would say as you sort of go up into like high school, or sort of like hit, you know, 13-ish, you get to the point where you want to start seriously exploring it. You know, you might have just had like symbolic boyfriends and girlfriends, but largely I would say it takes until you're like 11 to get to the point where it's like you can actually make the you can distinguish between what is like a friendship and what is, you know, romance, and what that feels like. And that's, again, another learning process. But this next milestone specifically, I think, is sort of entering into the world of romance. And I think mostly it's social to begin with, of like, it's a way to improve your social standing. Insofar as I think that those first few relationships are a way that you pair off with people for social standing. Maybe there are exceptions to this, but my experience personally was that you're testing the water of like, how far away from the normal of your normal social group can you go before people look at you strange? How far can you stretch socially? How far can you reach? Or, you know, like, because there is a social hierarchy, and I think the whole of high school is you playing that game, of like, where do I fit, and trying to improve that. If you care, I think most kids care. And you know, this first relationship is about reaching and improving that standing through aligning yourself with somebody else, and bringing them into like the criteria for like where you are quote unquote ranked. And I think that most people who've been to school will understand what I mean by like the rank of like where you stand, where your group stands socially within the system, within the school, within your year, within the whole, within like your phone group or whatever. There's lots of like micro hierarchies within the social standing, and it's just like, again, comes back to that thing of like figuring out socially where you fit, and this next milestone, getting into the first relationship. It doesn't seem to me that it's usually anything with legs to begin with, because it's to facilitate those friendships. It's to facilitate getting yourself, like, bettering yourself and finding the friends that you want and that you get along with. And rather than it being about this specific relationship here, it's more about how it enriches this entire thing, through aligning yourself with this person. So there might be a particularly close relationship between yourself and this other person, but like widely, it's to improve relations elsewhere as well. And I think that sort of dissipates as you enter into the next step, and that's kind of like your first serious romantic relationship, where you're at a point where you kind of know enough about romance, and you get to just to give like timelines, brief timelines, estimated timelines even, you sort of like, I don't know, 16, 17 at this point, maybe 15, and you really fall for someone. This can obviously, that changes. I was like 18. Yeah, I think I was 18 when it first happened. Yeah, nearly 19. But it's this time it's about the relationship itself, and you're branching away from those friendships, and all those friendships that you've developed, the ways that you've learned to lean on people and communicate with people, they branch into this next relationship, and you focus a lot of, if not all of your energy on navigating this, on how to be with someone. And there'll be mistakes, there'll be pitfalls, and maybe the things will end, but this is where I think the big transition into your romance becomes a more prominent part of your life than your friendships socially, in terms of time investment and thought investment, and energy investment. You sort of get to a point where you spend a lot of your time like alone together. You'll organize dates and stuff like that, rather than it just being like, we'll arrive at the social event together, we'll all arrive at the park together. It's like, oh no, let's go and have a meal, let's go to the cinema, let's go do something like an activity. So this is like the beginning, like marker 3, where it's branching off into something more. And this is where the big pitfall, I think, lies, in terms of allowing your friendships to start dipping off, because you feel like you can rely on this romance. And there's a bit of like a fluctuation that happens here, a bit of a back and forth of like, you'll give yourself, and this is my experience really more than anything else in it, but I think it's a common experience, where you'll give yourself to a relationship, and then the relationship will end for whatever reason, and whenever you need support, you'll sort of end up back in your friend group, and hoping that they'll take you back in. And it's interesting, I think, that these things become more of a safety net than the focus of your attention, because I think at this point, to sort of get to the point of like what I mean, it's more important to maintain those friendships, because I think that the balance between the return on investment in terms of how much you give and receive, and the permanency of that connection, how well you can rely on it, and also how far you can intersperse your investments of like having specific friends that do specific things for you, and you talk to specific friends in a different way. Like, I have like friends that are also into film photography. I have friends that are really big into books. I have friends that that also love music and will go to live events together. And I have friends that like we're united in like scarring, in terms of like emotional scarring, and like we'll talk about specific stuff. And it's a good way to surround yourself with absolutely everything you need. Not every relationship has to be the same, and I'm not saying that you should choose one over the other. I just think that we overvalue romantic relationships and grossly undervalue our friendships. To sort of give an example, I was with someone for like 3-4 years, and I just sort of like, and if anybody's watched like the previous videos, I've just sort of like assimilated into this relationship, and I was giving everything to it, and it was wonderful. It was beautiful. It was a wonderful relationship, and it was supportive, I felt, and I felt safe within it, and I felt safe enough that I wanted to spend all my time away from things with her. Like, my life was busy. I was spending a lot of time at work, and I was like, oh, when I leave this place, I don't want to be going to see friends. I want to be going back to see this person because I love them and I want to spend this time with them and I want to be able to be there for them. But I'd completely neglected almost all of my friendships. And when the time came for this relationship to end, I was in a terrible place, a terrible mental headspace, and I had very few people that I felt I could fall back on when everything went to shit. And that was a mistake. I allowed the romance to supersede my basic friendship. And I think that in terms of these like markers, these like big like social events that happen to us, I find it interesting that the first thing that you do is make friends and find a friendship group. I find that really interesting. And I think that what happens next in terms of romantic relationships, we keep reaching for the next milestone, right? In terms of like how we further our social skill, the skill of being social. Because fundamentally that is what we are as animals, is social beings. And I find it interesting that once we have reached for the romance, it's almost like you leave the other milestones behind. The other stuff is kind of less important now because you've found this new thing and you're moving on to the next thing. And it's almost like, if you look at it in terms of a career, like your social career, let's call it, you've started off with like the apprenticeship, which is you making friends. Then you go to like, junior kind of like employee, which is like, you've got a friend group, where you sit, and you're starting to branch off into like that social romance that I talked about, that facilitates the group more than it facilitates the romance itself. And then you move into like, a fairly senior position, where you're like getting into a serious relationship, and then it sort of moves on from there, doesn't it, of like the marriage and stuff like that. And I think that a lot of times we can forget about the fundamentals, and I think that's kind of what I want to emphasize here, is like the way in which people visualize their relationships. And I mean that in terms of like all their relationships, not just romantic, the way in which they visualize it as like a map of like their life, of like, you can't really sustain yourself socially as an animal by yourself. So it's like, how do you map out almost like your social nutrients? And I think that 90% of it should be you putting effort into maintaining this core friendship that sustains you for the most part. Whatever partner you find will never be able to sustain you fully. And that's okay. That's fine. That doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile having somebody that you spend a lot of your time with. I'm just saying that you should probably find satisfaction in the other areas of your life elsewhere. And friendships are an easy, foolproof way to do it. You know, have a friend, like I said, that you like to talk about books with, friends that you like to play games with, friends that love to listen to music, friends that are into photography, whatever it is you do, bowling, swimming, football, cricket, any kind of sports, any kind of entertainment, anything. It could be chess. Find friends and create this almost like spider web of people that you can rely on and fall back on and talk to, and that you actively check in with, and that they will actively check in with you. And this core group of people, figure out what your limit is. My limit is like around six or seven people that I know I can like really, really invest my time in outside of like a work environment. That number grows when I'm sort of forced into a situation where I have to spend time with like people like at work. At the minute, there's like a core group of like boys at work that I would say I'm good friends with. That number will probably change once I leave my job, but for the time being, I feel able to invest in these people. So yeah, my number is around 6 or 7, and that's just the amount of people that I know that I can check in with regularly and care about their lives in a meaningful way, and hopefully expect that in return. And my life has become so much more emotionally, socially nourishing since I put that effort in. And at first it wasn't like a conscious effort. It was more so I was just surviving and these people were helping me. And then all of a sudden I had this sort of thought process like, no, I want to formalize this. I need to check in with myself and make sure that I know exactly what I am and aren't capable of for these people. So that's something that I check in with regularly. And I just think that when everything else falls down, sometimes to have all your eggs placed in one romantic basket is not a worthwhile investment. To spread those things, spreading those things out, I think, is a much more effective way to cover your back when things go wrong, because things will happen to you. That is the course of life. You know, I don't think anybody goes through life unscathed. Everybody comes out with some sort of scarring, and the important thing is how you react to those things. You cannot change what happens to you, really. There are a lot of things that you can control, but like the general arc of life, that things will happen to you that you can't control. And making sure that you've set up an infrastructure almost that will support you and nourish you when those things start to happen, I think is an important thing that people need to focus more on. And I will continue to do that. I will also be pursuing, romantic relationships at some point. But I will be doing it mindfully, making sure that I'm giving time to this thing that I'm excited about romantically, because that's a side of my life that I want to be satisfied with. But also making sure that the people that were there when everything hit the fan are still in, for me, being looked after, that they're being checked in on when I think that things might not be right, or even just, I want to make sure that I'm checking in regularly, so that that you're still in my mind, and that hopefully the reverse is true. And also integrate them into that social circle, So yeah, I think friendships overall are more important than whatever romance people experience. And maybe this is maybe I'm talking about a real niche case. Maybe nobody else does what I did, and thus won't have learned the lesson because they didn't need to, that I'm talking about here. Yeah, maybe that is the case. However, it felt important because this channel is basically just me saying things that I'm experiencing and are going through, or have gone through, and how I've responded to those things. I wanted to just come on here and say it because it's something that's been on my mind, and I have this deep sense of gratitude for the people that came back, picked me up, put me back on my feet, and made sure that I kept moving when I'd neglected them for so long. Stuff like that is worth something. It's really worth something. And I think as much as I can, I would like to be that for them if they ever need it. Hopefully they never do. But I would hope that at least they know that if that happened to them, that I will do the same. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this episode. I've been Ashley, and this has been The Void, in which I speak and probably nobody listens. I hope you had a good morning, evening, afternoon, night, and I'll catch you in the next one. Someone who really knows me, someone who when they hold me